On today's episode, I'm going to be talking with Jason Knott from CE Pro and Mark Corbin from Vanco. We'll be talking about a couple of things, specifically navigating the supply chain woes that all of our integrators are facing and building better networks for resimercial and work-for-home applications.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is ResiWeek, episode 337, The Awkward Nephew.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by
Extron, industry-leading technology backed by world-class support.
This is ResiWeek. As you may notice, this is not Matt Scott. This is Uncle Richie, Rich Fregosa. I'm filling in for my good friend Matt today, and we've got a lot of things to talk about, a couple of things actually. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce two gentlemen who I am very happy to have here, and obviously are going to do most of the heavy lifting since I'm pitch hitting for Matt on this one, and I am super fortunate to have these two gentlemen here, best guys for it. First off, it's Mark Corbin. Mark is the president of Vanco International. Mark, great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Rich. Really looking forward to talking with you guys today. I'm very excited about it.
Well, I had the opportunity to interview you guys not only at ISE, but also at Infocom. So I've gotten definitely the deep dive of it and a lot of products, a lot of information to process. The next person is somebody who I've known for quite a long time, a friend of the show, but just a friend in general. Jason Knott, the editor of CE Pro. Jason, it's always great to see you. Welcome.
It's great to be here, Rich. Thanks for having me. And if you're Uncle Rich, then I'm awkward nephew Jason.
We'll work with that one, right?
Okay.
You know, everybody needs one of those. By the end of the show, we're gonna have a nickname for Mark, right? He'll be.
I'm afraid to know what that might be.
Right, distant cousin Mark. Yeah. So, there are a couple of stories that we wanted to talk about this week. The first one, and ironically so, comes to us from CE Pro. CE Pro has a story that is obviously something that we've talked about a lot. But still is going to be a conversation piece for the rest of the year. The story starts with distributors offer their best advice for navigating the AV supply chain. This was kind of interesting because this is a obvious issue for dealers, for manufacturers, and everybody's kind of pitching in and trying to figure out how, to deal with this issue. We deal in technology. We deal in products that require chips, that require electronics, and there is something called a global supply chain shortage. And, what they go into, this is interesting for me, was that we talked to the dealers. But this was, how do the intermediaries deal with it? Distributors are in a rough position because, right, they hold product, and if they don't have product to hold, they can't get it to dealers. And so they're article, which I would definitely suggest when you check the links after, talk about some of the basics of how to deal with what is going to be the ongoing supply chain issue. Everything from basics like communication and, forecast planning and everything else. And, I'll touch back on the story in a second. But, Mark, I'm going to go to this one with you because this is great because you're a manufacturer. And obviously, if you go to the dealer forums and the boards and all of the online groups that are out there, you can throw a nickel and hear about a dealer supply chain issue and woes and it's definitely affecting business. But we don't always get the opportunity to sit and talk with the manufacturer. And, I think sometimes the rough part is that although people know that you're working hard, they don't always appreciate that you're working hard. Let's talk about this a little bit from, let's talk about the distributor side, because you obviously deal with distributors and your experience with that, but, really more importantly, the manufacturer side.
Sure. It's funny. I was looking at the article, and this is a great question you're asking. We're blessed to really deal with all these distributors that, commented, and I definitely know Helia well too, but it's interesting because we really, as a manufacturer, we've had to work extremely closely with our distributors, and that's the absolute truth. If you read through the article talking about brainstorming extra inventory to get brought in, over ordering certain items, that's really important when you're communicating directly with the distributor. You have to have a game plan when you're having shortages. You have to be upfront. Your communication has to be extreme because things have been changing monthly, to be honest with you. We could go from a 9 to 12 month lead time to all of a sudden a 6, and those kind of things have to be communicated immediately just from an inventory standpoint. So on the distributor side, it has been extremely important for us to communicate thoroughly with them and come up with game plans for each distributor depending on what their forte is, whether it's security, AV, speakers specifically, flat panels, whatever it is, right? Those things have to be addressed. From the manufacturing side, what's become extremely challenging is, one, lead times, but two, some of your products don't have those lead times. So if, for example, you're in the cable industry where we're not utilizing chipsets nearly as much unless they're active cables, it isn't as big of a deal. So your ordering can differ between on the product you're dealing with, especially amplifiers, for example. We've all heard the horror story of that. We as a company have been actually having to side buy chipsets just to be able to try to deal with this, because even from our true manufacturers who should be buying the chipsets with us in China that we have, we're having to go to a whole different facility just to get chipsets to finish off products. That also adds more QC time though. So what's been really interesting is as you're trying to build your inventory when you can get it, you're also trying to figure out how can you get other pieces to really fulfill the rest of your orders. And it's a very interesting process. And this goes for speakers, it goes for amplifiers, it goes for any kind of Wi-Fi control piece, wireless piece, any kind of Bluetooth piece. These are the things we're all struggling with. And to your point, trying is all we've been doing, and to be able to even forecast these things is a challenge. And our biggest fear as a manufacturer is, and we talked about this, I think 2 years ago, we were getting products fine, and now we're seeing we can't get products. Well, my biggest fear is that chain will eventually catch up. Then it is, how do we manage the products coming in at that time? Because I know, as a matter of fact, for Vanco, we definitely are over inventoried on certain things because we had no idea how to anticipate even the shipping leads and the manufacturing leads at that point because of the demand. So what's really important for manufacturers and distributor in the future is to communicate, because I do think there will be a flux in 2023 where we're going to see a lot of products possibly on shelves at this point. And one of the main reasons for that is even people who can't get amplifiers, who have to get amplifiers, are getting amplifiers somewhere else because they got to finish jobs. That will cause load up on inventory, which will be an interesting case come in 2023. And that, as a manufacturer, I do pay attention to very closely, because we will see a point where we're back into inventory, but our distributors could have a lot of inventory on their shelves just trying to fulfill back orders. Those back orders could get canceled due to the fact that they're having to use other products to solve things. So it's going to be in my opinion, it's probably going to be a tough battle up until 2023 when we start to see inventory levels come back to a full standard.
I'm going to go ahead and circle back to that in a sec, but I want to get some input from Jason. So Jason, obviously, CE Pro and the other magazines that you deal with. You're in the heart of it. You guys are running obviously this story, so this is obviously newsworthy, and it stays in the news cycle. From your perspective, being able to deal with dealers and with distributors and manufacturers and kind of being the fly on the wall, where do you see this going? Where, we've got everybody offering advice at this point, and we kind of keep going down the chain. In terms of when you're speaking with dealers and with the distributors, we're halfway, we're past the halfway point of 2022, right? Where do you see that this next section as we close 22 and 23 as it relates to this story?
Well, what Mark just brought up was fascinating to me because it's something I hadn't even thought of, that tipping point might happen where the demand is going to catch up, the supply is going to catch up to the demand, and then it's going to reverse situation. So that's going to be very fascinating to watch. I mean, I'm amazed. I just saw something yesterday from a major manufacturer, not in this space, but in the technology space, excuse me, saying that they think this is going to go into 2024, which is amazing to even contemplate. But just kind of coalescing this article, if people didn't get a chance to read it, there's some really good tips in there, and I'm just kind of run through the ones that I kind of pulled out that I think integrators might want to focus on. One is order early. You know, the earlier you order, then the earlier it gets into the system. Also, that cuts down on expedited shipping costs that you may have had to carry in the past. Look at stocking up on key high turnover items. Even if you don't have a sold product and you have the cash flow and you can maintain some sort of a small inventory as an integrator, go ahead and buy some of those extra products for future projects, even though you haven't sold them yet, if you have the money. This might be the time to investigate some new brands, as Mark said. And that we know that's happening, and actually we're just getting ready to deploy a survey to find out exactly how broad that switching of brands has become during this time frame. So a lot of integrators are looking to new brands just because of availability. Something I heard as a great tip is make your proposals brand agnostic. You're going to say to that customer, you're going to have an AVR. I cannot tell you what the specific brand of that AVR is going to be in your project when it comes time for the installation. But don't lock yourself into that specific brand if you can't. Install in phases. Is there a way that you can go to a customer that, you were doing a whole house lighting system and you can't get the lighting modules now for the whole house? Hey, can I just do this main room and then we can do the rest of the house as we get to it? I've heard some integrators talking about that. Mark hit on this, which I think is a great point, is build the relationships with your manufacturers right now. That guy, the guy that, why be a jerk to a manufacturer that, guess what, that's going to come back to nest right now, when is the time that if you'd formed those strong relationships, those strong bonds with the manufacturers, then that's going to, help you get access to those products that you want. And then the other thing that I think is going to have a great long-term byproduct of this whole situation is that now it's forcing integrators to ask for the deposits earlier. So now you shouldn't be buying that product until you've got the deposit. I did just say, talking out of the other side of my that if you can stock up on certain brands, you don't have the project, go ahead and do that. But for the most part, you got to be asking for those deposits earlier, and we're hearing that from integrators that this has forced them to not be as lax in terms of getting that money in their hand before they go out and buy something. So I have a question for Mark, though, and this is kind of twofold, and part of this whole situation is, how much we hear about the difference between the retail inflation numbers and the raw supplier level. And the supply chain is not only putting, the inability to get the products, but also the cost of shipping them to get that shipping over from China or up from Mexico or wherever it may be. How much of that pressure has been put on the manufacturers to pass along that cost? Are you guys eating some of those costs as manufacturers and only really having to get them out to the dealers when you just can't do it anymore?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Inflation of shipping alone really doesn't get weighed in as much because it's more, everyone talks about raw goods. The biggest part of inflation is, we'll just give some standard numbers. If I'm bringing in a entire trailer that's, let's call it, it's a 40-footer. If I'm bringing that in at, let's say, $7,000 3 years ago, and I'm bringing it in at $24,000 now, where does that inflation get put in, right? Because you're not talking raw goods at that point. You're not talking building materials. You're not talking truly manufacturing. You're just talking about moving the product. So as a manufacturer, that has been one of the most extreme challenges, is that we couldn't even predict that inflation of how difficult getting products overseas to here would cost, and not to mention just the inflation of containers alone. And if you're importing a lot of containers, like most manufacturers are, right, it's almost impossible to catch up on that until it starts to go back down, because otherwise it's hard to give a price increase when you can't really measure the raw materials and the actual manufacturing process and labor and all that. You can't roll that into shipping as easily, right? So that's something that just has consistently changed. I will say it's starting to flatten out, but that's still 60, 70% higher than we've been paying for the last 2 years. So those things have made it really challenging. I think the lead times have gotten more secured, meaning the lead times are adequate, but they're longer, right? So instead of 60 days, I'm at 90 days, but it's staying at 90 days. And that's the problem, is that my fear is when I was talking about what happens when it goes the other way, it happened to me on a few categories where I over-ordered because there was a big demand and we were pushing products out the door, and all of a sudden my order shows up in 60 days. Well, now as a manufacturer, I got double my inventory that I thought was going to take another 120 days to come in. It actually took only 60 days to come in. So that really changes too the way manufacturers are having to work even with their distributors. So that's why that communication thing is so big, because we're still not quite have the formula for how quickly products are going to be coming in. Like I said, they're getting better, they're getting steadier, but we still got these long lead times, and I worry about that cycle flipping towards 2023. So.
Let me ask you one other quick question. Sorry, Rich, and that's related to, I hear from integrators who are like, oh, well, my client just says I'll pay more. If I can get, whatever, if I got to pay more to get the product or get it shipped here quicker, I'll just pay more. Is that really an option?
I mean, it's allocated. I mean, it should be allocated. There's no rush shipping. I mean, I think you guys have heard the stories. We're in the same boat. The minute we get amplifiers in, they're out the door. You know what I mean? It's one of those things that in our system, it's allocated to who's got the orders in first. And hopefully that's how it should be. Now, I'm sure some larger mass retailers probably have some commitment to some manufacturers. We specifically don't sell to retail, but I just can tell you right now, I don't think paying extra for shipping is causing you to get the product any faster. I mean, that really isn't, from my side of things, I haven't seen that really take place.
Well, it's good to know that there isn't, the secret code word to get the good stuff out of the back room, right? Yeah. Obviously, we could continue on supply. We have done shows on supply chain issue, but I think let's go ahead and let's move on to the next one. The next story comes to us from residential systems, and it's something that we're seeing a lot of as well, which is resimercial is becoming a huge sector for the integrator community. And this article comes to us from Nathan Holmes, who is the senior manager of training over at Snap One, which was a nice little guest spot that he put in. And really, they're talking about building better networks for work from home and for resimercial applications. This is, again, I'm still a consultant, so this is something that we've seen a shift and we've battled with over the years. We've always been proponents of using higher security, just more robust, hardened networking systems, across the board. Network security is something that we're finding more and more is becoming part of the news. And for integrators, it's something that is uncomfortable territory at times. And one of the things that I liked about the article is that they do talk about some of just the kind of the greatest hits of the transition of instead of using kind of an off-the-shelf that you could find in your, almost local supermarket at this point. But, you can go ahead and you can get eggs, you can get diapers, children's clothing, and Wi-Fi routers. That's not always the best approach to take when you are dealing outside of just a personal use application. They go on to talk about, things like, really the basics of networking, setting up your use cases, determining what's going to be connected. Are they going to have to, obviously in work from home applications, how are they going to access potentially sensitive information from a company? We're seeing the shift. I think everybody that we've talked to talks about things like, hybrid, hybrid work, hybrid learning. We're hearing the terms that are coming around that they call meeting equity, where you are trying to create as close as possible an out of office and an in office experience as much as you can. Well, you need a network in order to be able to get close to it. Jason, I know that I'm going to start with you first. CE Pro has covered this quite a bit as well, dealing with integrators, dealing with network engineers. You and I both have relationships with a lot of the CE specific network companies in the chain. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing as the shift when you're talking with dealers, and are they seeing this shift towards resimercial and work for home, and how's it affecting their businesses?
Yeah, this was a great article, I think, just because it went through, as you said, some of those real key important tips that integrators need to do when they're setting up these networks for the home offices. Couple of ones that I hadn't even really thought of, which was the idea of putting in more access points than you normally would in a residential environment if it's going to be a home office entailed. And then also the backup power, which typically a home office is not going to have a backup power situation or battery backup. But to your point, it's interesting what we're hearing from integrators in regards to the work from home thing is that a lot of integrators are telling me that the C-suite executives who were forced during the pandemic to work from home, they were finding a lot of business with them. But for the rest of the people in an organization, it was really kind of a fend for yourself environment. And most of the integrators I spoke with were having real success with presidents and CEOs and executive VPs and those sorts of people. But beyond that, the general worker who was forced to work from home, they were not seeing a lot of business there from a home office setup standpoint. So the one other thing about this article that I think is important to point out is, and you touched on it, the security measures. I still see cybersecurity as one of the next big frontiers for integrators. And, according to our research, only 27% of integrators are doing any sort of cybersecurity offering to their customer base. That means 73% are doing nothing to offer some sort of cyber protection, and they're going under the assumption that whatever's built into the hardware of the equipment that they're installing at the network is good enough. And I think they need to really look hard at cybersecurity. We just ran an article last week on CE Pro, if anybody gets a chance to check it out, about an integrator who fell prey to a phishing incident via his email, and it cost his builder $62,000 in a wire transfer that came from his email being hacked. So it's something that integrators need to address on the network side.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is a great story, and we are hearing more and more about it. And, the liability issues as integrators do start becoming more involved with the network. Obviously, we're moving to an AV over IP world. We see it. I mean, Jason and I go back to the days of, when we still had to hand solder DB25s, and VGA cables, and in the analog world had your security was more a matter of just get the signal over there first, and then we'll worry about if somebody else can see it next. But it is rapidly evolving, and like I said earlier, I had the opportunity to do some pretty extensive booth tours over at ISE and Infocom with Vanco. I mean, you're heading into it's if there's a skew, there's that digital duct tape that you guys are providing for it at this point. Where, and again, from the manufacturer standpoint, you're not necessarily making networking products, but you're making devices that have to operate on these networks.
Absolutely, yeah. This is a great article. I agree with Jason. This is a really good read, and some of the things that really I noticed stick out, because even when we're manufacturing, it's funny because this is definitely like, how does an integrator set up a network? How should it be done? But it's really not much different, guys, than when I'm sitting here looking at my AV over IP and I'm saying, okay, like read this article. It's pretty amazing, right? I mean, adhere to the industry standards, right? What is what does your system need to be set up for? For example, if I'm making an IP system, do I know exactly the right router to have? Do I have the right, power? When it comes to, I love even the fact that they go down into wire when possible, hardwire when possible. Little things like looking at your 5 gig between your 2.4. A lot of people don't realize that if you're using a dual banded router, you will lose some, when it's trying to figure out 5 gigahertz to 2.4, you get a communication error sometimes. These are all really important tips. And as a manufacturer, we really abide by similar tips, right? Even though I'm not truly a network manufacturer, I am still making sure that when I design a product, it's adhering to all the industry standards. It has the security in mind, right? Where it's capable of blocking out users and monitoring it. And I think the biggest thing is for any of the integrators and dealers out there, you have to be able to remote monitor everything, right? So it is so necessary to make sure that that network's protected, because if you need to get into it, a lot of guys are too far away to be able to figure something out immediately. It needs to be remote accessible, and that includes all these products over IP, whether it be lighting, whether it be video control, whether it be audio control. You're going to see audio over IP coming out this year. I mean, you're going to see a lot of this stuff, and it's never changing. So reading this article is extremely beneficial. I was very impressed with it. And I will tell you, from my standpoint, to Jason's point, I think there's categories of people that ResiMercial has really grown. Just from the manufacturer side, I'll tell you up front, sales, marketing, and to your point, Jason, upper management are definitely, putting in more ResiMercial just in their homes. But we've noticed just in the last 6 months that the, IP sales just in the Resi market have gone way up. And it just shows you that more and more people, to your point, Rich, too, are adapting to an IP dedicated system. So more than ever, this article means a lot. So it's very well done, and I enjoyed reading it. And it's fun to talk about, because, guys, we're just going to keep seeing this, and it's only going to keep enhancing.
And like I said, I love having both viewpoints of, Jason, you're dealing direct with the dealers on one way. Mark, you're obviously dealing with your dealers who are like, we need product. We have to work their way through. Are we seeing that integrators? I mean, I think the commercial channel has always had a different route that they've taken, because when you're in an office building, you're in a corporate workspace, you're in a classroom, IT is typically not your sandbox. You're typically working hand in hand with them. Resi, and when you're taking that leap from one to the other, a lot of times you're the point of contact for the client. If you had one or two things that you would tell from your experience from the manufacturer side, and also, Jason, from what you've been dealing with the dealers, what would the advice be that you would be giving them if you haven't stepped into this market? Why should you?
I mean, what I hear from integrators, one, they love this, the doing ResiMercial work, because, and again, I'm talking about the residential integrator who might be moving into the corporate environment or the retail or bars, clubs, restaurants, so that kind of migration towards commercial, if we're talking about that direction. Dealers love that because the projects are bigger and they're not dealing with the persnickety heads of household, and usually the installations are easier because you've got open ceilings and things like that they can deal with. It's interesting, though, that our data showed the pandemic hit the commercial market very hard. We all know that. It had built up to almost 40% of the typical residential integrator's revenue was coming from commercial projects, and when the pandemic hit, it went down to 17%. So a lot of that, people just weren't going to bars, clubs, and restaurants, and offices, and those sorts of things. So I think it's coming back. We saw a 2% uptick up to 19% last year. compared to the first year of the pandemic. I think it's going to come back even stronger. But I'll say this also, the crossover, the lines were blurring before, and it's going to continue. I've talked to major manufacturers who I've gone and visited, and they're showing me, unified communication systems and things like that. And I'm like, why are you doing that? And they're like, why are you showing me that? I'm here with CE Pro. And they're like, because any of our corporate boardroom projects that have fewer than 5 boardrooms are being done by a Resi guy. The large commercial pro AV guys, the projects are too small for them. So I don't know if that's changed in the pandemic or not, but that's kind of where it is at. But the same reason that residential integrators diversified into commercial in 2008 when the housing market crashed is the same reason that I think you're seeing this cross diversification now when the commercial market was hit so hard. It behooves integrators of all types to have that cross pollination, in my opinion.
Great. Mark, I'm going to tee this up for you. Vanco, bar and restaurant business, there's solutions that, I've spec'd them before. I've seen them before. There's lots of reasons why Vanco product makes its way into non-residential applications. Obviously you moved into UC. We've seen that as well. And one of the things when Jason was bringing it up and just talking about people going away, we've also been seeing another trend over the past 6 months that I didn't expect coming out of the pandemic was the reliance now, especially in resimercial, in hospitality, in restaurant, small bar, mom and pop shops, even like convenience stores. There's no more physical items anymore for like shopping lists or menus, or all of a sudden you can't walk into a place without a QR code and pulling it up. And if that system's down, you can't just hand somebody the old vinyl covered menu anymore. And I know that, part of, I've always seen Vanco is that you have front and center pieces, but what I've always appreciated is that you kind of, the sweet spot has always been the backbone pieces. As a manufacturer, and because you cross so many segments, what is that advice that you would provide these, your dealers who are on the fence and like, we don't want to deal with that networking stuff?
So it's so crazy. I was just going to make a point that think about every restaurant you go into, think about every bar you go into. It's digital signage everywhere. There's a flat panel everywhere. It's explaining everything. These guys understand how to work these equipment. Our equipment's not just my equipment. There's equipment simple enough to set up and use that isn't going to have 100 sources to 300 displays, right? That's a totally different job. To your point, the bars, the restaurants, the small local retail stores for whatever they are. It goes back to knowing your products. So I really think it goes back to knowing your limitations on your network and knowing how many products, like in this article, it tells you how many products are you hooking up and what do they need. And I think that's the biggest part, is making sure that if you have 15 TVs and you're running it through your IP system, that you know the requirements and the specifications ahead of time. And honestly, if you're going into it talking with your distributor, talking with your tech support, I think it's one of those things that these guys are all doing it already. They're just taking it to a little bit larger level, and it's not that much more complicated. It's just really recognizing what your system's requirements are and what can they handle. And once they get comfortable with that, they'll be successful with it. I really feel that, because as long as you're abiding by what your parameters are and even what the industry standards are, a lot of this product's been tested a million times to make sure it does work for these dealers and integrators. So my biggest piece of advice in this big trend of Wi-Fi and net hot access points and all this is just know your limitations. It's huge. So.
Well, I think that's probably the best way to wrap it up. A lot of information in there. We could probably keep on going, but I think this is the perfect place to put a little bow on all of it. I'm going to go ahead and work our way out. Mark, if people want to find out more about Vanco or get in touch with you, how can they find you?
Absolutely. You can find us at vanco1, that's the number 1.com, and you can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn at vanco1.com, Vanco International.
Perfect. Well, always a pleasure having you on.
Yes, thanks so much, Rich. Thank you very much. It was a lot of fun. Jason, thank you too, buddy.
My old friend, so what is it? My awkward younger uncle, Jason, not if obviously we are skewed towards the resi side of the market. If anybody watching the show wants to find out more information about CE Pro, if they don't know about CE Pro, they better find out fast. But if they want to find out more about CE Pro or get in touch with you or any other way, how can they find you on the vast interwebs?
Yeah, the World Wide Web is still out there. So cepro.com is our website. Obviously, encourage everybody to bookmark that and check it. You can sign up for the newsletter there, which we do 4 days a week. You can follow me on Twitter, Jason at Jason W. Knott. We're also on LinkedIn and Facebook. We have a CE Pro group on both those platforms. So I encourage you to reach out to us with any questions.
Great. Well, as my good friend Tim Albright says, don't follow me. I have far more interesting people I'd like to point you to, like Mark and Jason. But if you do want to find Uncle Richie, you can find me on the interwebs. Type in my name, but you can find me at rfregosa on Twitter. Our company, we do have a consulting and programming company that's still around and actually entering our... I have officially entered my third decade in the industry as of, I think, July 1st. And you could find me on those various places if you do want to follow me. But the best place that I hope you can find me would be on our suite of shows. Obviously, we've got A State of Control with my good partner, Steve Greenblatt. We've got all of our other shows. We've got we've got ResiWeek, all of our verticals. But the best place to find us is on AVNation.tv. This is Uncle Richie for ResiWeek, heading on out for AVNation.tv.